Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, and today we've got a very interesting guest who's going to tell us life in Dansville, all about life in Dansville, what he does, what other people do. I think you'll find it interesting. It's one of those snapshots of Western New York, a little slice of life in Western New York. And of course, as always, the State of Greater Western New York Report is brought to you by none other than...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeylake Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and welcome, everyone. Again, this is the State of Greater Western New York Report, coming to you every Thursday at noon, or you can watch the replay Fridays. How about Sundays at 1:30 on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Hey, with me today is a fellow by the name of Frank Williams. Frank is a very active person down in Dansville. He's involved in the media, and I think you'll find out what he has to say as being pretty interesting. But first, before we get into all that, let's have Frank tell us a little bit about himself. Frank, tell us what you do, what you've been doing, how long you've been doing it, and just all that you do.
Welcome to everybody. Uh, well, so yeah, Mike on there in October of 1978. Maybe a lot of back picture of a fallen tower on the front of Rochester, because that's exactly how the started. The tower fell. And, I remember Dave Nance, who was the radio announcer in Rochester for quite a while, said, "Well, hey, that's great. We're not even on the air, and everybody knows who we are." But at any rate, we've come a long way since then. I've been here, since 1978, working as a sports announcer and doing some other odds and ends. Also worked at the store here in Dansville as well, and also writing some of the local newspapers, the Tennessee Country Press, the Livingston County News. I've also been involved in 79 and 1980. I was the second voice on the Rochester Red Wing broadcast with Pete Brown just prior to the shareholders takeover. And then, of course, I've also done some work in the pulpit since 2004 in various Christian churches around the area. Probably, I think it's last count, 27 Christian churches up until this point in time, and still doing a service or two every weekend. So with regards to if they're keeping me out of trouble, they're doing the best they can. I'm not sure exactly how well it's worked.
Well, Frank, that's very interesting. You've led a very diversified life, if you will. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing. You mentioned the Rochester Red Wings. Tell us, who was involved in that time? Who was playing for the Red? This is when they were with the Orioles, right? It was that far back. So, who were some of the players on the team?
Days. Yeah, the interesting thing there was, Bobby Bonner was there, and of course, I think a lot of know Bobby, of course, our academy, let alone his outstanding Christian life, let alone baseball accolades. But probably one of the bigger names was, with the Rochester Red Wings at that time, was Mike Boddicker. Mike Boddicker went on and had a stellar career as an Oriole, the White Sox. I think he also pitched for the Royals and the Red Sox in his day and age. And as it turned out, the shareholders takeover happened 1 year later when a guy by the name of Cal Ripken Jr., I think he might be a household name to people in baseball, but he came on the scene the following year. When I was with the Rochester Red Wings, Bob Gaughan was the assistant general manager. Bob Drew was the general manager at the time, and of course, like I say, Pete Brown and I were doing the play-by-play broadcast. Well, Pete had been there quite a while before. I was there for those 2 years. I and Pete, both of us were a couple of casualties of shareholders takeover along that line. But it was certainly some exciting times for the Rochester Red Wings, and of course, the following year, if I'm not mistaken, it was Bob Drew who ended up broadcasting that historic 33 inning affair against the Kentucky Red Sox out in Massachusetts the following year. So I missed out on that. As far as being groomed from a sports professionalism standpoint, as far as broadcasting goes, I'd have to call Brown my father with regards to broadcasting. Outstanding gentleman who was very, very in tune to what went over the air and exactly how well, but certainly a true professional indeed. That certainly was an exciting time in my life. Of course, had the opportunity to do one of the Rochester Red Wings versus the Baltimore Orioles exhibitions. The first one was canceled in '78, or '79. But in 1980, I had that opportunity, and walking through the dugout, almost ran over Steve Stone in the runway. He ended up winning 20 games for the Orioles. And I'm walking through the dugout. One of the interesting things that occurred, I'm looking at all these guys. I said, "Gee, I've got all these guys on baseball cards. I'm not supposed to here." But the other funny story about that was Pete Brown had sent me down to the Orioles locker room to get Earl Weaver's batting order. And of course, I went in, and as you know, Earl Weaver was a man about himself, and he was a unique individual indeed, great for the game of baseball. And when I walked into the locker room, he was standing up on one of the benches with the lineup card in hand, talking to all the media. And one of the things he had said, he goes, I only come to Rochester once a year. And don't you think they'd give me a lineup card with 10 places? And of course, that obviously is the reference to the designated hitter, which had gone into effect a few years before that. But everybody got a pretty good kick out of that. But Earl used to draw a crowd, and so did the Red Wings. They still do. And that was a very, very exciting and memorable part of my life, no question about it. And that was at Old Silver Stadium over on Norton.
Right. And I think a lot of other people probably have great memories of that time too. I, for one, was probably selling pizza in one of the vendor stalls while you were doing that. I don't remember what year I did that. It was one of my jobs where I got a real job.
One of the other things, Chris, that I remember too, with regard to that, I remember a young man at that time by the name of Will Rumbold, who grew up listening to a lot of the broadcasts. And a few years later, we did a sectional game up there here at WDNY. Wayland Cohocton played, I think they were Wayland still at the time, played Wellsville up there. And as it turned out, Wellsville ended up winning that game rather handily. And I had ridden up on the Wayland bus. Well, as it turned out, somehow, somewhere, I was still up on the roof of Silver Stadium unpacking my gear when the bus from Wayland departed the ballpark.
Oh, no.
So I came down to find nobody anywhere to ride home with at that point in time. And Will Rumbold, strangely enough, at the time was a security guard for the Rochester Red Wings. And he came over and asked me, he said, "Gee, Frank, what happened?" And he got me back inside the clubhouse downstairs, and we made a series of phone calls, et cetera. And one of the things I remember, one of the kids on the ball club, his name was Mark Skura, his father and his sister are lawyers here in town in Dansville. And it just so happened Mark had one of these souped up cars that he brought to the ballpark that night. and somebody had damaged it somehow, some way, that it was inoperable. And as it turned out, about 2:30 in the morning, Bob County, who was the superintendent of Wayland, Cohocton Central Schools at the time, pulled into the parking lot to pick up Mark Skura to bring him home. And Will happened to be around the corner, and he comes running in the door, and he says, Frank, there's a guy from Wayland on the other side of the ballpark. You know Bob County? I said, yes, I do. Does he have room? And Bob said, yep. So as it turned out, I ended up getting back about 3:30 in the morning from that little exhibition. But certainly a lot of memories from not only Silver Stadium. I've also had the opportunity to broadcast a few sectional games up there at Frontier Field as well. So certainly brings back a whole lot of.
So speaking of memories, you've been doing this for what, 40 years now or more? It's kind of not sure on the math on that, but tell us how radio has changed over those decades. You know, from the point of view of, say, a listener, you're an inside guy, and you know, you will have experienced this firsthand. You'll probably trigger some memories within the listeners on how they remember what was going on. Tell us some of the differences between, say, just WDNY now versus today, or then, now versus then.
Well, you know, at the time, you know, when WDNY came on the air, we were only a daytimer at 1600, and I know Dave Vance was pushing for that free sunrise authority because basically, what good was it coming on the air at 7:45 when it had just snowed 2 feet and all the schools were closed and we had no way of notifying people along that line? It was kind of like having a screen door in a submarine. But fortunately, that managed to occur. We ended up moving up the dial at 1400 and getting the pre-sunrise authority, and eventually went full time. And then also ended up with an AM. But as far as radio itself, you know, there are a lot of times I almost wish we could go back to those days. But I remember one of the things. I mean, people who would listen on the outside may not have really heard any differences, but there were a lot of differences going on behind the scenes. I remember when we used to have to call and have a dedicated broadcast loop installed anytime we had to do a broadcast. I remember particularly one time when the Dansville football team was playing Canisteo, and Dave had called in to the phone company to have the broadcast loop installed, and the guy went to Canastota instead of Canisteo, and had called me the day before the broadcast to test the line. And I said, "You're calling me from where?" And he said, "Whoops." And he made the venture down from Syracuse all the way down to the Southern Tier the next day. And we managed to get that straightened out. And of course, as time went on, we ended up with the modular plug-in phones, which worked fine. And it made things a whole lot easier. And of course, nowadays, depending upon how you use cell phone technology, at times when it works, much like anything else, it is a whole lot easier. But as far as from a listener standpoint, I think one of the things that's happened now is that instead of having that, shall we say, that air sound you used to have, especially on AM radio, you don't have any of that anymore because of the crystal clear technology, et cetera, that we have now. And I think that's probably one of the bigger differences along that line, and makes it more listenable. And I think obviously technology as it is will probably keep getting better. And probably one of the biggest changes in radio was in 1978 when DNY came on the air. We were a little small station that maybe had a 20-mile radius coverage area, and on a good day, maybe a little bit more. And depending upon how the weather was, maybe a little bit less. But the interesting thing is, once the internet came around, cell phone technology, et cetera, now people can listen around the world. People, go to your website on dny.com or whatever it is, and now, we'll do a broadcast. I know a few years ago we were doing the Wayland Cohocton girls basketball team, and one of the players' brothers was stationed in the military out in California. listening to our broadcast. And I'm thinking, here we were, this little rinky-dink radio station, and people are listening around the world. How does this happen? But that's probably one of the biggest changes, no doubt about it. Your local radio station isn't just local anymore. Now it's global.
I know when we've experienced that at the paper, when we broadcast the local high school games, it's on the internet, and we get messages from people all over the country, grandparents, aunts, uncles who want to see their sons and daughters play. It's actually a really good thing, I think, in terms of spreading that experience out, sharing that experience of growing up, where kids can have their older relatives from all across the country see what they're doing. So what you're doing, Frank, I think that's a great job. You know, you mentioned the thing about the dedicated lines. And I have to admit, back probably 40 years ago also, I was a sports broadcaster, and I had to get those dedicated lines. And what people don't remember, they're used to the little clips where you plug the phones in. And that's not the way it was back then. You actually had to take the little device or thing in the wall apart and wire. You got to get the red wire in the right place, the green wire in the right place, or you're not broadcasting. Forget the blue and the yellows because they don't matter. But these are things that people don't know anymore. Frank, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about Dansville, right?
I guess.
All right.
If you say so, Chris.
All right. We'll see you after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to the state of Greater Western New York. With us is Frank Williams. Frank is a sports broadcaster, among other things, at a radio station called WDNY in Dansville, New York. Frank, how is it when you go out and talk to people, when you're doing your other things, because you do other things, right? You deliver mail, you speak from the pulpit, so people see you in everyday life, but they also know that you're broadcasting sports for their kids or for other sports. How do they react to you when they come up and see you and talk to you? Are you just a regular guy, or are you, or do they want something to know about, like, real inside scoop of what sports broadcasting is all about?
It's interesting, Chris. It's one of those funny things. You know, when you first start out, you hear yourself on the radio say, "Oh, gosh," you know, and you have a lot of people coming up and say, "Oh, geez, that was an exciting game last night." And you're always your own worst critic along that line. And it's one of those situations where you from what Dave Vance used to tell me, says is you kind of become a small scale local celebrity, if you will, at that point in time. But I think that's kind of gone, by the wayside, because you're out in the community all the time and people know who we are. And nowadays, I mean, I'm not full time at the radio station. When I first started here, I was full time at the radio station until about 1993, when I finally got the job at the post office. Then I was full time. At that point in time, the radio station was located right across the street from the post office. So, but I've been at the post office full time. So and depending upon which generation you talk to, they might say, well, he's the radio guy or he's the mailman. so, so I don't know. And of course, naturally, some of the others will say, "Oh yeah, I remember him preaching at our church." And there's a lot of different hats you wear, but to me, you can only be the one person that you are, and that's what God has given me, and that's what I go with. And at this point in time, people more or less, talk to me as normally as anybody else because that's what I am. I'm just a normal person, and whether I'm delivering mail, whether I'm delivering the other good news, or I'm working convenient, or writing sports, whatever it might be. I think it's gotten to the point now where it's more so, hey, that's right, and that's about it. But then again, that's my standpoint. I can't speak for other people, so.
Well, tell us more about Dansville. What are some of the events that people do? What happens over the summer? And we were entering that time of year now when you usually see festivals and things like that. What goes on in Dansville that maybe people from other areas would go like to check out?
Well, I know certainly probably one of the big things coming up in a couple of weeks is the Dogwood Festival, which takes place just after Mother's Day. And the Dogwood Festival has been around for well over 50 years, and there's usually a parade, and there's usually a week long worth of events that kind of lead up to there's sales in the park, things along this line. I know many years there was a carnival down at Babcock Park as well for the final couple of days. So it is a very big time, and one of those situations where you realize what a small community is all about, how a small community comes together and makes these big things happen. I mean, the Dogwood Festival in Dansville, the Tree Sitting Festival in Cohocton, and I mean, there's a multitude of others as well. Also in Dansville, obviously, the New York State Festival of Balloons has also been in the backyard for quite a long time as well down at the airport, and that's always a Labor Day weekend and always draws a pretty big crowd as well. One of the things that is probably new to Dansville, just the last couple of years, is we now have a college baseball team. I think a lot of people in our area are familiar with the Hornell Dodgers, who are now the Hornell Steamers. The Dodgers played at Maple City Park back in the days of, Junior Gilliam, Carl Spooner, and many of those, Maury Wills and some of those all-time Dodgers actually played there on their ways to the bigs. And, of course, now Dansville has a team in that same league, the New York State Collegiate Baseball League, and they're called the Dansville Gliders. And the Gliders came on the scene here last summer and had a great deal of success within the community and a great deal of support as well. And this year will be the second year of that program here in town, and they're ramping up now. And I know they're in need of a few host families, but they've got sponsors, and we have players come from all over the country. Much like you probably have in the Rochester area, the Rochester Ridgemen, I'm sure people are familiar with, and down through the years, the Webster Yankees, and these teams. And it's an exciting time of year. It draws the community together. It brings a lot of excitement to the area as well. So those are probably three of probably the major things that usually take place on an annual basis here in Dansville anyway. And I'm sure, there are usually once in a while, like on Fridays, they do a lot of different First Friday events on Main Street in Dansville. Probably one of the bigger of those is like Winter in the Village, the first weekend of December, where people kind of move their wares out on the street and everything. And that, of course, is Mother Nature permitting, of course. But, so there's certainly a lot of things going on in Dansville. And much like there is any other community, I guess it's one of those situations you've got to be there in order to experience it. And I guess that's the invite along that line, is to come and check some of these things out.
That's actually a good idea. I think Dansville, I mean, I've been to Dansville. I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers have been to Dansville, in and around the area. There's a lot of good things, fascinating things to look at. I mean, the one thing that I'm always I'm always looking for it. Can't see it as much now as you used to be able to, and especially in the summer when the tree's there. But it's the famous Dansville cut, across the little hill there where the Lackawanna Railroad make a cut so that they could go all the way to. Let's talk about the opposite direction. Where do people from Dansville go to within the Western New York region? What do they look forward to going to over the summer? What are some of the things that people talk about that aren't located in Dansville but are located nearby?
Well, I know, one of the things that I hear a lot of people talk about is golfing. Obviously, being a sports person, and there are certainly a lot of uh, golf venues around the area, and people along that line, and of course also boating as well. And I mean, in the Finger Lakes area, you've got a ton of options. Whether it be Canisius Lake or Canandaigua Lake, Hemlock. Uh, you really have your choice. I think that's a lot of the major talk along that line. And of course, obviously, the closer you move to fall, the more talk there is about going to Buffalo because the Bills are there, and there's always a lot of excitement, and that goes hand in hand throughout the season. I mean, people talk about the Buffalo Bills all year round. Now, right now, the talk is about the upcoming draft, and then Josh Allen is going to be in the golf tournament there. People are talking about that, and before you know it, they're going to be at St. John Fisher, or and the season's going to be kicking off again, and here we go for another 16, 17 weeks or more, hopefully. But that's usually the major talk along that line. And of course, right here in Dansville, you were talking about different things that take place in Dansville that might not take place in other areas. One of them is gliders. I talking about the Dansville Gliders baseball team. And one of those things is up on East Hill. There are a lot of people who still do hand gliding. So they get a little lift up there from one of the planes here. And Dansville has its own airport. One of the independent pilots flies them up on the hill, gives them a little tug, and off they go. And uh, I have no clue how they control those things, but it certainly looks like a very peaceful thing. I'd hate to have a rough landing for sure, but at any rate, there are people who are doing hand gliding along that line as well. My wife reminded me as well. Right now, there is a brand new sports facility taking shape as well. I should remember that because it's on my mail route. Down off Weidman Lane behind the school building, they're building a new sports facility there, which will incorporate, football, track, et cetera, with new lights and everything. And it's supposed to be in operation this coming fall. So that'll give people a little bit more interest along that line. And probably one of the historic points as well in Dansville is in the old train depot down off Battle Street. In the past few years, Battle Street Brewery has popped up. The Aiken brothers and a number of other people have gone to work and really pretty much restored the old depot there. And matter of fact, they got an award for it. I know a national recognition award for using so much of the original building and all of the things within the structure to enhance the aura of Battle Street. Is another, I guess you would call it a local site that people certainly are interested in. And when they go in there, they also get a good history of Dansville too, because you see a lot of the old newspaper clippings on the wall, et cetera, from many years past, and it's real interesting reading as well. So there's not only a lot of excitement going on around Dansville as well. There's still a lot of exciting and new things going on in Dansville as well.
We have time for one more quick question, and this is a question, a favorite from the viewers whenever we talk about a certain town or village, and that is, who do you think is the most famous person that's associated with Dansville? They don't have to have been born there. Maybe they did something there, but who would be the most famous person from Dansville?
Well, there have been a number of who have been instrumental in Dansville times, and For me personally, at this point in time, it would have to be the late John Shea, who passed away, unfortunately, just less than a year ago or so. And John was one of those guys who was born and raised in Dansville. His family was successful. They were successful business people in Dansville for years and years and years, were always active in the community, always backed everything in the community. And John was one of those guys that if something happened in Dansville, you could bet something good happened in Dansville, you can bet John Shea had something to do with it, whether he's on the board of directors for the hospital, or it was the Rotary Club tip-off basketball tournament, whatever it might be. John Shea, some way, shape, or form, had something to do with it. And not always by name, sometimes an anonymous donation would come in from somewhere. And I'm not a betting man, but I would bet John Shea would have something to do with that. But John was a personable guy, friendly guy, got along with everybody in the community, supported the community. And if there was one huge cheerleader for Dansville and the surrounding area, because there is a Sports Wall of Fame down at Alfred State College that's being named after John as well, it would be John Shea in my estimation. I mean, next to God.
Well, Frank, thank you very much. And thank you all for watching today's show. And remember, if you want to be a member of the live studio audience, go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com and you can sign up for free to get an invitation. Every Thursday morning, it'll be emailed to you and you'll be able to watch the show live at noon. And you can ask your own question of our guests. So if you missed that and you want to see what everybody else asked, then tune in, either go to the site, stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, and look at the archive, or just tune in at 1:30 on Sunday on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Frank, thanks again for being a part of today's show, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks very much. Awesome.